First of all, welcome back. We're going to have a look at multiple columns using the Bootstrap grid, but the multiple columns are responsive, meaning that they work really well on mobile devices. So I'll show you how that works, why it works like that, and how you can set that up to use that in your course. But please make sure you check out the other Moodle courses down the bottom or other tech courses that we've got to teach you about online education and putting your content in to online course platforms, especially the Moodle platform, and including the latest one, which is Moodle 4.0. So check that out. But before that, let's have a look at the Bootstrap layout. You can see here we already have an example of some content on the left and a picture on the right using the Bootstrap grid. Now, what does all of that mean? Quite simple. It's just some CSS that modifies your HTML to format the content in a way that looks much more presentable than having just some text on a page with an image underneath it and the text, the whole thing continuing down the page. So it's a nice way of creating multiple columns. What does it look like when we go to a mobile view? Let's have a look if we go and check out our mobile view as well. So just going to go into our developer tools here, switch to our mobile view, and you can see there that the text stayed at the top and the image has dropped down below. So that's the second column. So we're talking about two different columns here. So when it goes down to mobile, it will drop down to that layout. And if I change it to maybe a Surface Pro, you can see how it's switched back to that layout with text on the left, image on the right. If we go back to something smaller, here we have the text above and the image drops down below. So let's switch that back off. Go back to our normal view and have a look at what this looks like. If we go to the Bootstrap grid code first to give you a look at what the code looks like, it's quite simple. All you are doing is creating multiple columns using a row class. So we have a container. The outside container contains the content inside it, and there's some CSS that manages that outside container. Just means that other containers don't overlap or other objects don't overlap. That container will keep everything contained into the one section or one area. So then we have a div class equals row, and that creates the whole row. Then we have our columns, and each column, class equals col, divides up our columns just nicely. If we have multiple columns in there, it will just keep dividing them up evenly into that row, provided there is room. But once the screen gets to a smaller size, then obviously it all drops back down and you end up with items one above the other. Now, how does that work? The first column stays at the top. The next column drops down below and the next column down below that. So it just keeps dropping down below, which makes it easier to use. Now, one important thing with the grid, which I'd like to show you further down, we're going to skip way down here, is that the grid can also be divided into certain widths as well. So you're not limited to just it randomly working it out and evenly spacing all the columns. You can choose the column spacing and it's divided into 12. So if you divide that all into 12, you'll have 8 in this case and then 4. And the CSS for that is column SM8, column SM4, which means it's 8/12 and then 4/12 for this column over here. Or in this case, if you don't put the numbers on there, it just evenly spaces out the columns for you. That's the very, very basics of how it works. So how does that look in our actual example? If we go into our settings, go into our code and have a look at our code that we've got here. Just might open that up for you to make it easier. You can see I have div class equals container, div class equals row, and then I've divided this in basically in half. So 6 out of 12 or half for our col MD6, and that nice and evenly divides up the first bit of content, which is all of this text, in relation to our image, which sits on the right-hand side in our second column, so col MD6. Just as an example, let's say I wanted to take this a little bit further for you, just to show you how it breaks up in a different layout. I'll just grab all of that and add it to the bottom. I'm just going to change these numbers here to 8 and 4, making sure that they still total 12. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 gives us our total. If we just go back down and save and display, you'll see now that we have our first one, which was 6 and 6. So that was divided equally in half for our columns. Whereas this one is 8 and 4. So it's 8 out of 12 and our 4-hour, 12-hour on this side. So that's how we can evenly space our columns. Remember too that when we drop this down to different device sizes, as we get further down, it will start to drop down, and each column will drop down below the previous column. So we'll still end up with the same layout when we drop down to mobile without it sort of being too complicated. So remember, when you're talking about content and you say, look at the picture on the right, that may not be relevant because the picture may not actually be on the right if they're looking on a mobile device. It may actually be below. So think about your wording and how you explain things when you're talking about multiple columns or content in multiple columns. Now, this example showed you text and then a picture. You can have text and text. You can also have the picture on the left and the text on the right, or whatever you like. And you can have multiple columns, meaning more than 2. You can have 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 12 columns if you want, which sort of gives you a bit of a table sort of layout in a way. But hopefully that's been helpful to you. Remember, check out the courses, have a look at Bootstrap. It is part of the Moodle 4.0 theme is Bootstrap, because that's how the theme is actually built, is using the Bootstrap system. So I'll show you a few more things about Bootstrap, but like I said, check out the courses, like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.